the exiled government of Tibet is Lobsang Sangay. He's currently visiting the US and he joins us tonight from Boston. Lobsang Sangay, thank you very much for being there. Now,
Thank you very much.
Young monks and nuns, teenagers, setting themselves on fire in the streets. What is so desperate that is leading them to resort to such violent protests?
It's really tragic and sad to see so far 24 Tibetans, some very young and some old, giving up their lives for freedom in Tibet and return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. What they're saying is the occupation of Tibet should not continue. The repression of Tibetans should not continue. They would choose to die than leave. This is a sad commentary on the failed policies of the Chinese government.
What is it exactly? What are you hearing about the individual stories of these people, the personal battles that have led them to this point?
Yes, in Tibet, Tibetans cannot protest. They cannot peacefully gather. If you do, you might get shot at. And you can't have hunger strike. You can't have rallies. And Tibetans saying this is the only or the most drastic way of protesting against the repressive policies. Because let's say in monasteries, photograph of His Holiness Dalai Lama is banned overall, but you are made to denounce the picture of Dalai Lama whom they revere. And there are so much restriction is imposed that many choose to leave or expelled. Hence they are saying, given the circumstances, political, economical, social, they're saying it's so repressive, they will give up their lives and made a commentary that freedom be restored in Tibet.
Has the Chinese government been moved by these brutal public suicides?
Unfortunately, there is blatant discrimination as to how the Chinese government treats Chinese people and their protest and Tibetan people's protest. For example, the local party official in Lhasa has declared, quote-unquote, war on protesters and Tibetans. Which government in the world will declare war against its own people? Now, they have sent hundreds and thousands of troops towards Tibetan people. As it is, Tibet is under undeclared martial law. There is a Chinese writer who says that in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, there are more Chinese than Tibetans. There are more surveillance cameras than windows. And there are more, if I may add, more guns than butter lamps for Tibetan people. Under such circumstances, the Chinese government and its hardline policies is discriminating and treating Tibetans quite badly.
China's Vice President Xi Jinping visited the United States last week. He's expected to take over the country's leadership next year. Now, Barack Obama rolled out the diplomatic red carpet for him. Are you shown that same respect of office in Washington?
Well, we always want good relationship between China and any other country, be it US or Australia. And the President Obama and the State Department, the Congress leaders particularly raised issues about Tibet to the Vice President Xi Jinping. And we also appreciate our Foreign Minister's Kevin Rudd January 15th statement on Tibet. And him raising the issue with Xi Jinping in 2010. But we will urge international community not just to raise statements and not just to raise issues and issue statements, but take concrete action. We want the Australian government or the US to send delegations to Tibet as to find out what exactly is happening, why Tibetans are self-immolating, why they are protesting, why the repressive policies of the Chinese government is resented by Tibetan people. This kind of fact-finding delegation will provide a better light as to what are the main grievances of the Tibetan people and how best to find solutions.
Have you specifically asked the Australian government to do that, given this is our region?
Yes, we have actually from the Tibetan Parliament and our Kashak, we have written letters to different head of states urging them And generally, we have also issued open statements to international community to send fact-finding delegation to the United Nations as well, to send a special rapporteur to Tibetan areas, and for journalists to have access to the area so that we know exactly what is happening. If the Chinese government is so suspicious, they should allow liberal Chinese scholars to Tibetan areas and do investigation and report to the Chinese government so that we can find a win-win peaceful solution to the Tibet issue so that this vicious cycle of violence after violence and repression not continue in Tibet.
Well, why is it then that countries like Australia and the US aren't sending those delegations in on fact-finding missions as you've requested?
Well, the US consulate in Chengdu did try to send some staff members to Tibetan areas, but they could not access the area. And I also urged the Australian government to send fact-finding delegation to Tibet. And Prime Minister Julia Gillard has been quite strong on human rights. And the Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd, when he visited Beijing, he said, human rights is equally important to economic rights, which should be the basic principle on which international community should approach the Chinese government.
Trade with China is significant for Australia. It's adding millions of jobs here over the past decade. To what extent do you think that economic dependency compromises the Australian government's ability to condemn Beijing's human rights record and do something about it?
I hope not, because Australia was founded on the principle of human rights and universality of freedom. If economic interest takes priority over everything else, and what is really is the purpose of a government and a state, if basic human rights are not respected in one's country and not respected and commented in other places as well. So basic human rights and freedom has to be one of the core principles of any government. So Australian government and Australia, as much as they have trade relationship with China, they must take a stand on human rights because, again, if I remember correctly, Kevin Rudd made a formal apology to Aborigines in Australia. This kind of action should be urged to the Chinese government so that there will be healing, so that the President Hu Jintao's call for harmony within China will be practiced in reality. That to have real harmony, there has to be healing, and there has to be a peaceful way to solve this issue, issue of Tibet, not through guns and violence.
It was self-immolation that triggered the unrest which brought down Tunisia's leader and led to copycat protests in Egypt and Libya. Have Tibetans been emboldened by the Arab Spring, do you think?
No, Arab Spring, or that, for that matter, Colour Revolution, or the freeing of Nelson Mandela, or the coming down of Berlin Wall, all these are positive direction and events in the world history. So any kind of assertion of freedom is welcome, and Tibetans see this as positive direction in the world. But I can't say Arab Spring necessarily prompted Tibetans to protest against the repressive policies of the Chinese government, because Tibetans have been doing it since 1950s. And Tibet has been under occupation for the last now 60 years. So what we are protesting against is the occupation and repression for so many years, and the 2008 uprising nationwide in Tibet made it very clear that Tibetans do not tolerate and accept the continuing hardline policies of Beijing.
China, along with Russia, is blocking a UN resolution calling for the Syrian regime to step down and stop attacking its own people. It was hardly a surprise, was it, that China would push back against any precedent-setting attempt to usurp a country's right to reject democracy?
That's true. As China rises, and as many countries, including Australia, are keenly analyzing as to what kind of China is going to be in the international forum, one should take note of vetoing of resolution on Syria and such, violent crackdown on Tibetans as to what kind of hardline policies and actions the Chinese government is capable of. So this is a sad commentary on China, and it tarnishes their image. As long as the Chinese government does not solve the issue of Tibet, their image and respect in the international community will be diminished considerably.
Now, you're the Prime Minister of Tibet, albeit in exile, and yet you've never been to Tibet, as I understand it. When do you expect to be able to get into the country so you can more properly represent your people?
Yes, after His Holiness Dalai Lama transferred his political power, now I am the political head of the Tibetan people. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to visit Tibet in 2005, but I gave up my job at Harvard Law School, where I spent the last 16 years, and I have left America, actually, and returned to Dharamsala, a beautiful hill station in India, to serve for Tibet and Tibetan people. Now, I've given up America and Harvard to get to work for this, cause, because I do believe, sincerely and wholeheartedly, I will return to Tibet one day soon, where there will be freedom, and His Holiness Dalai Lama will be in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet.
Is there any softening of the position in Beijing that you're noticing?
At the moment, not. In fact, there is more hardline reaction. Now, they're sending more troops, they're cracking down on more Tibetans, and no tourists are allowed now, no journalists are allowed. Even Chinese visitors are discouraged from visiting Tibet. So they have really sealed off. Now, with the Tibetan New Year, Losar, beginning tomorrow, and 10th March, National Uprising Day, coming soon, we are extremely worried as to what kind of hardline policies and crackdown the Chinese government is going to implement, and rest of the world will not know how many Tibetans actually suffered, maybe died, may die under such circumstances.
In what way die? You don't mean self-immolations?
Not just self-immolation, because any kind of peaceful gatherings is seen as threat by the Chinese government, and we have reports on January 23rd and 24th where they were shot at and many Tibetans were killed and many were injured. Now, as to protests inside China by Chinese people, they're allowed, not only they're allowed, their grievances are addressed. As far as Tibetans are concerned, any kind of gathering is seen as threat to the national security, and they even get shot at and arrested. So these are the things we are really worried.
Lobsang Sangay, thank you very much for being there for us this evening.
Thank you very much.